Good morning to all of you here and to all of you who might be watching OLN. My name is Larry Rankin, and I welcome you to this 2022 Otterbein Memorial Day Remembrance. Let me make first two announcements. One is, out of respect for our speakers, our readers, and our musicians, please turn off those cell phone ringers, please. Please turn off those ringers. Mute it, please. And a few times during this service, you may be asked to stand, but do so only if you are able. Now please stand as you are able and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and then join Kathy Davin in singing our national anthem, our Star-Spangled Banner. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Be seated. I'd like to ask our chaplain, Jack Marsh, to invoke God's blessings upon this service.
May I pray for you? On this day, O God, we gather to remember. There are people we know, some we served with, some who we've heard or read about, and some who we only know in a kind of faceless, vague way. Of all the people and events we remember this day, O Lord, remind us that we need not call you to be with us, for you promised in Jesus to be with us always, even to the end of time. We have gathered here to remember those who have given extraordinary service, and some who have given even their lives. May we always be thankful for this, just as we are thankful for the life you have given for us. Amen.
Amen. Permit me now to make a few introductory remarks. On this Memorial Day, we individually gather to remember our cherished loved ones who are no longer with us. And collectively, we come together to honor our men and women in uniform who made sacrifices in war and peace to defend freedoms at home and around the world. 1945 marked the end of World War II as America and her allies triumphed over Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan. After 1945, the Cold War era began, with regional wars breaking out, usually in the form of our country and allied nations, opposing the expansionary aims of communist totalitarian regimes. The first such war was fought on the Korean Peninsula, starting in 1950. A post-World War agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union eventually established two Korean countries, separated only by an arbitrary 38th parallel boundary. South of this line, the American-backed Republic of Korea emerged, while north of this boundary, the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea came into existence. The Korean War erupted in 1950 when hostile troops from North Korea crossed the 38th parallel to viciously attack South Korea. For the next 3 years, armed forces from South Korea, America, and selected United Nations countries battled fiercely and rigorously against enemy combatants from North Korea and the People's Republic of China. Finally, in 1953, both warring sides agreed to cease hostilities and return to a modified 38th parallel border. We will never forget the sacrifices made by our brave American service members in this Korean War. For their sacrifices were great. 34,000 killed in action, 3,000 fallen from non-combatant conditions, 11,000 missing in action or taken as prisoners, and 103,000 wounded. It is now our privilege and honor to hear stories from two of our Korean War veterans with us today, Jack Myers and Bill Lewis. And we sincerely thank them and their families for sharing these stories with us. I will read the setting for each of these two stories, while daughter Jennifer Hathaway will read Jack's story, and John Weber will read Bill's story. Let's begin with Jack Myers' story. In 1949, Findlay, Ohio native Jack Myers enlisted in Ohio's Army National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. By the beginning of 1952, his Guard Infantry Division was mobilized for possible deployment to the Korean Peninsula. The Guard promoted him to the rank of Warrant Officer Junior Grade, specializing in administrative clerical work. In October of 1952, Jack received orders to join the 3rd Army Infantry Division in Korea to fight against the North Korean and Chinese enemy forces. Later that month, Jack reported for duty with the 3rd Division.
Before arriving in Korea, I knew about many events of the war. I remembered that President Truman called it a United Nations police action to counter North Korea's sudden attack on South Korea. No matter the war's title, I intended to accept and deal with each day's events and circumstances. Upon reporting to my 3rd Army Infantry Division, I was assigned to a rifle combat unit. Its frontline position was near the makeshift 38th parallel border that separated the two Koreas. My job as clerical administrator placed me and my aides in the rear trains, a tent area behind the fighting soldiers. I immediately faced the reality of being in a dangerous war zone. For 10 months, I served my combat unit under many different titles. 2 especially interesting roles involved taking pay to the front line and fire safety. As pay officer, I distributed monthly payroll and payments to the soldiers. Instead of using American currency, we paid with paper money called scrip. It could later be exchanged for real currency. And as fire marshal, I investigated fires and explosions. In one instance, on Christmas Eve, Soldiers lacking kerosene poured gasoline into a kerosene heater meant to warm their bunker or trench encampment. That heater unfortunately exploded, thankfully causing only minor injuries. After quickly investigating the incident, I began preparing the required formal report. I spent the entire Christmas day producing 20 report copies to please the Army bureaucracy. During my time with 3rd Division, I sensed that we were neither winning nor losing. The battlefield in my region of Korea stretched about 100 miles, mostly along the 38th parallel. We moved frequently to different combat locations, never knowing whether we were advancing or retreating. Half the time, I never knew where I was, maybe in North Korea, maybe in South Korea. The opposing military forces were fighting to a stalemate. Although I personally never engaged in combat, I knew there were many brave American soldiers from my unit who became casualties, killed, or wounded in action. I knew this because I never returned to my rear trains position. I also knew this when I saw replacements coming through on their way to the front line. On multiple occasions, I and fellow soldiers received orders to guard against enemy stragglers at nearby locations. Off we went with combat gear assembled, helmets on, and carbine rifles in hand. Thankfully, we encountered no resistance. The war left little time for R&R, rest and recovery. The only time I received a 4-day pass, I visited Tokyo and its Japanese surroundings. After having an enjoyable time, I somehow caught the measles and was quarantined to a local infirmary's tuberculosis ward for a short stay. Finally, by the summer of 1953, encouraging reports suggested that both sides of the conflict were about to sign an armistice agreement. The belligerent Chinese army used this moment to unleash a final lethal attack against the unsuspecting American and Allied troops. On July 27th, all the parties at war signed the agreement calling for a complete cessation of hostilities. 1 month later, I returned directly to San Francisco on a troop transport ship. Also returning on that ship were many recently released American prisoners of war. I returned to Ohio, and then 2 weeks later started graduate school at the University of Michigan. Looking back on this war, I believe good was accomplished. First, we defended South Korea from a despotic North Korean takeover. Then, notwithstanding flare-ups from time to time, the two Koreas have maintained relations for the past 69 years. And today, the 51 million South Koreans remain free and own a world-class, prosperous economy.
Let's give her a hand. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Jack. Next is Bill Lewis's story, and this will be read by John Weber.
Soon after the Korean War started in 1950, Sharonville native Bill Lewis enlisted.
Wait, I was supposed to read that.
I was trying to cover.
You did. You tried well. Yeah, I'm supposed to read the
Sorry, that's not my part.
It was my part. Thanks, John. I woke up. Soon after the Korean War started in 1950, Sharonville native Bill Lewis enlisted in the Navy. Following boot camp and a 9-month electronics technician school, Lewis reported for duty aboard the USS Cotton. Designated as DD 669 and described as a Fletcher-class destroyer. For nearly 2 years, Lewis and his 300-plus shipmates worked diligently to bring Cotton out of her post-World War II retirement and into a state of war readiness. And then on May 18, 1953, the revived Cotton and crew departed their home port at Newport, Rhode Island, and sailed to Japan by way of the Panama Canal, San Diego, and Midway Island. Now, John.
There it is, Japan, the land of the rising sun. All eyes looked shoreward as we drew closer to Tokyo Bay and eventually docked at Yokosuka, an American repair base. While there, several guys and I took advantage of liberty by making the short train ride to Tokyo. Somehow, we managed to find a place called the Bar Susan that featured music and Asahi beer. When the cute little waitress served our beers, her now topless appearance certainly caught our attention, and we drank more beers. But then, back on board the ship at a very late hour and in a weakened state, we learned that both the surface search radar and a tactical radio needed immediate repairs. The party was over. We electronics technicians worked on the equipment for the next 40 sleepless hours. What a sobering experience. We left Yokosuka and cruised in the Sea of Japan to join task force ships. That evening, from the electronics room, which housed our 4.5 RPM record player, chessboard, and coffee pot, I stepped out to the ship's O1 deck. There, I noticed heat lightning on the horizon. Moments later, I saw more lightning that strangely flashed 6 times in succession, and then another 6 times. I realized that I was witnessing the Korean War for the first time. War suddenly became a spine-chilling reality. No longer a well-scripted heroic scene on a movie screen, no longer a colorful page from a comic book. It was a real war, and the next day, we would be part of it. My guys and I talked little that night, a very somber night. For the next month, we carried out combat operations off the eastern coastal waters of Korea. One screening operation involved the Cotton and several other destroyers escorting an aircraft carrier for the 2 purposes of rescuing a downed pilot and guarding against unfriendly submarines. The other mission was joining forces with the cruiser St. Paul to supply shore bombardment at Kosong in the south and Wonsan in the north. We targeted gun emplacements, supply lines, storage areas, and concentrations of hostile combatants. On one occasion, enemy artillery from shore struck the cruiser, causing minor damage and just missed hitting us. Then, on July 27th, we learned that the armistice was signed. Joy and relief swept through the ship. Some say that we lost the war. However, I believe that it was never a war of conquest, but rather a war to save a poor, defenseless ally. Now that nation, South Korea, remains free and prosperous. As fighting stopped, Cotton for several months remained combat ready, continuing her screening operations, training for anti-submarine warfare, and of course looking for chances to deplete Japan's supply of Asahi beer. During this period, new orders required Cotton's movement to Incheon, a twice-embattled city on Korea's west coast. I went ashore there to discover the physical scars of war, destruction and rubble everywhere, buildings damaged, and walls riddled by gunfire or blown apart. I also experienced a disturbing scar that was deeply and indelibly imprinted upon my soul. It was about the North Korean women. Was my war effort responsible for these women now without husbands or now without fathers? Does not every life matter? Well, back to one more Liberty story from Usan, Japan. A few of us took the opportunity to ride horses, take hot baths, and swim in a grass-bottom lake. But to really relax, we decided to ditch our Navy uniforms and shop for some more comfortable local apparel. We each bought a kimono, sash, and a cane, and we paraded ourselves through the village while bowing to our hosts. The local children were fascinated by these strange Americans trying to look Japanese. Nevertheless, they quickly lined up for picture taking, giggling all the while. In early November, we received word that our Korean War mission was over. We were homeward bound. The Navy amazingly allowed us to sail westward, enjoying stops in Hong Kong, Singapore, Ceylon, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Greece, France, Gibraltar, and Bermuda. On January 15, 1954, Cotton and her crew returned to Newport, Rhode Island. It is said that there is no place like home port. Thank you.
Finally, listen as Jack Marsh shares with you the story of Army Chaplain Herman Fellholter.
Called by God, Kentucky native Herman Fellholter was ordained a Catholic priest by order of the Franciscans in 1939. A few years later, he joined the Army's Chaplain Corps. By 1948, Chaplain Fellholter reported for duty in Japan to serve the 19th Regiment within the Army's 24th Infantry Division. Then on June 25, 1950, the Korean War erupted when the belligerent North Korean Army suddenly and maliciously attacked the poorly equipped and outnumbered forces in South Korea. Immediately, the American Army deployed the 24th Division, which included the 19th Regiment, to Korea. Its mission was to halt or at least delay the enemy's offensive drive southward. Chaplain Fellholter was now placed in the middle of a fierce human struggle while continuing to serve both God and his country. During the first 2 weeks of July, advanced forces from the 24th Division fought courageously against the surging North Korean army, but failed to stop their onslaught through the south. On July 12, the division's commander ordered the chaplain's regiment and 2 other units to cross the Coom River, destroying all bridges behind them, and then to establish defensive positions around the strategically important city of Daejeon. 4 days later, on July 16, the 19th Regiment took on such a devastating barrage of hostile tank, artillery, and mortar fire that it could not hold the Coom River defensive line. And to make matters worse, the regiment's only road back to friendly territory was completely blocked by now the encircling enemy troops. The situation later that day facing Chaplain Fellholter and many in his regiment was dire. It was initially decided that they would relocate into the surrounding mountainous area, hoping to evade North Korean combatants while finding American forces. But this movement required the able-bodied soldiers to carry 30 critically wounded soldiers, all lying on stretchers through treacherous terrain. The move progressed slowly as the carriers began to suffer from extreme exhaustion, unable to carry their own any further. Finally, the order was given to leave the wounded men behind, trusting that they could be rescued later. Also staying behind were the chaplain and a medical officer named Linton Buttry. At the traumatic scene, Chaplain Fellholter administered last rites and extreme unction to the remaining 30 soldiers, while Buttry attended to their physical wounds. The chaplain and Buttry were considered non-combatants, wearing a large white Latin cross and a red cross on their respective uniforms. They carried no weapons. War's evil hand was about to deliver an unthinkable, hideous blow. Upon hearing a nearby North Korean patrol approaching, Chaplain Fellholter told Buttry to leave. The medical officer managed to escape through sustaining a shot wound in one ankle. Then the enemy soldiers committed the unwarranted atrocity of ending the lives of all 31 Americans. For his extraordinary heroism under fire, Chaplain Fellholter was posthumously, can't get the word out, awarded the military's Distinguished Silver Cross. His name is also memorialized on a Chaplain's Hill monument inside Arlington National Cemetery. In John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends.
May we remember all the chaplains who have given their lives in times of war for God and country. Now, let's join Kathy Davin in singing America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
I'd like to speak to all of our Korean War veterans and to the spouses of Korean War veterans who are no longer with us. Yours was a noble and courageous cause. At home and places abroad, you steadfastly made valuable contributions in supporting the war effort. In Korea, whether on the ground, in the air, or on the seas, you fought tirelessly and valiantly to halt a belligerent enemy from placing all Koreans under a ruling government. Nothing is more evident of your sacrifices than South Korea today, a staunch American ally and 52 million people living freely in economic prosperity. And on this Memorial Day, we stand with you in honoring and remembering your war buddies who never came home. At this time, I'd like to ask all Korean War veterans and all surviving spouses of Korean War veterans to please stand as you are able to, or raise your hands from your seats, and receive our heartfelt gratitude for your service. Now, will all other veterans and any active members of the armed forces please stand as you are able, or raise your hands from your seats, and accept our grateful thanks for your service. All other veterans. You may be seated. Next, we honor the memories of our Otterbein veterans who have passed into eternity during the last year. Let us move solemnly through the next part of this service without my interruptions. Bonnie Brewer will now read the Jewish blessing of the mourners.
At the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember them. And at the blueness of the skies and the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy, we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are part of us, and we will remember them.
David Perrin.
Maurice Dion.
Robert Curlis.
Joe Walters.
John Peebles.
Alvin Mason.
Charles Bonecutter.
Harry Pritchard.
Louis Tim.
Robert Knauer.
Fred Duncan.
Howard Harris.
Joseph Escobar.
Michael J. Doyle.
Frank Mort Mueller.
William Kelly.
Ernest Godby.
Henry Brooks.
Dorothy Garrison.
Arthur News.
James Schweikert.
Harold Patterson.
Robert Gardner.
O Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. O hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. O Spirit, whom the Father sent to spread abroad the firmament, O wind of heaven, by thy might save all who dare the eagle's flight, and keep them by thy watchful care from every peril in the Today our warrior stands alone along the border far from home, keeping vigil day and night, protecting souls with peaceful might. Watch over them with guarding hand from peril in a foreign land. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea.
We close this remembrance service by joining Kathy Devon in singing God Bless America, followed by Chaplain Marsh, who will offer the benediction, and then conclude with the playing of taps. And as we exit this room, always be mindful of those with canes, walkers, scooters, or in wheelchairs.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand
This has been a time, O Lord, to remember and to speak a little of the prices that have been paid on our behalf. It is good to take time to remember and honor them, but as we leave this time and place, let us not forget the wounds, both visible and invisible, of all those who sacrifice on our behalf, and remind us always to be of help in caring for them. And may we go in peace. Amen.